Hi there. There's a lot of sun today, and I'm coming to you. This is Sandy with Environmental Coffee House, and I didn't feel like doing the whole computer thing. I'm just sitting in the living room, and I want to read this piece. It is an amazing piece. I found it in Slate. Actually, it wasn't me. It was sent to me by Carolyn Baker. Carolyn Baker is the person that I went with. I went to Colorado to take her and Dean Walker's weekend session, and it was really good. But I found this article that she shared, and I really thought it was important to read. So, hi Cindy. So hopefully it's not too sunny in here, but I'm all right. So, hi Jean. All right, let's go. It's called I Felt Despair About Climate Change Until a Brush with Death Changed My Mind. Leukemia and climate change have more in common than you might think. The name of the author is Alison, Spodek, Keimowitz, and it's touching. I was dying, not just in the way that we're all inching inevitably toward our own deaths each moment. I was hurtling toward a specific death with a name, a shape, and a timeline. I was 37 years old, and I'm dying of leukemia. I was lying in a hospital bed, so ill that diagnosis, when someone finally named the doom I had been feeling in my body for months, was a relief. At least the sense of vague terror and impending catastrophe I had been feeling had a name, a cure, in the shape of a stem cell transplant. It was possible, but it required the complete and utter dissolution of myself, dangling my broken body over the edge of the very cliff a cure is meant to postpone. It wasn't just my body that dissolved in those weeks. My mind and soul were also broken apart, fragmented, and brought to the edge of ruin. In medical terms, I became depressed, hallucinatory, and delusional. And in medical terms, the team of doctors really didn't have the jack shit to prescribe me except for patience. I was visited by a mindfulness practitioner during this time, but I was too far gone for prolonged mindfulness practice. Unable to bring myself to a set of exercises that had sustained me prior to illness, there was simply no self to bring. Instead, my visitor asked me to count to 4 in line with my breath and do it again, and to come back to the simple counting whenever I needed it. I could get to 4 and then 4 again. I could get through my pain, my nausea, my misery for the count of 4 breaths, and then I could ask myself to do it again. This practice didn't make me feel any better. I was still miserable. I was broken and absent. But it gave me the space to sit with what that misery, call it by its name, and know its shape. That was valuable, just as the name and shape of the leukemia diagnosis had been valuable some months before. After my stem cell transplant, I was pulled back from the cliff over which I had dangled for many weeks. My hands took part in pulling me back. Doctors and nurses, my husband, my parents, endless numbers of blood donors, and the new cells, a gift from a woman I had yet to come to know, a mother of 3 across the country who gave a new self to inhabit. None of these people knew if their gifts would have any effect at all. Nonetheless, they gave them freely, hopefully, and with the knowledge that they had nothing else to offer. 3 months later, I returned back to my home, my husband, my children, and my life. 1 year later, I returned to work as a professor of chemistry and environmental studies, teaching the same material I had taught before my illness. Some of it was banal, procedures for balancing chemical reactions, reassuring in their straightforward clarity, but some of it took on a new emotional significance, specifically teaching about climate change, biodiversity, and extinction. The planet is dying, not just in a way that life on Earth is always, inevitably beginning and ending, that species are rising and falling, that extinction and evolution occur, and that temperature and sea level cycles dramatically and irregularly. In the 21st century, Earth is hurtling toward a specific death with a shape, a name, a timeline. It is dying of global warming, climate change, extinction, biological annihilation, and ocean acidification. The exact names and the exact timing is debated, but the overall trajectory of life on Earth is well understood. We are in the midst of Earth's sixth mass extinction. And the odds of human civilization reaching the 22nd century are often estimated at no better than 50-50. When I began teaching environmental change in 2005, I focused on how to build a track away from the cliff of environmental catastrophe. When I returned to teaching in 2014, I found that I no longer could see a track that turned away from the edge. We are already locked into catastrophic changes, terrible human and animal suffering, the loss of so much of what makes the Earth itself. But the shift in my thinking was partially the result of what we've come to realize is truly possible with regard to climate change, informed by broader public and scientific discourses on strategies that are moving away from prevention and toward mitigation and adaptation. But it probably mostly came from my new willingness to see and acknowledge the hardest parts of the reality that had been there all along. I've now taught about climate change and biological annihilation 4 times since my illness. Each time we are closer to the edge, more carbon emitted, more warming locked in, more species gone, more wilderness lost, more homes destroyed. More starvation, wars, and human suffering have come to pass. In conversations about climate, there is a knowledge widely shared, but rarely explicitly stated. That it's that we're no longer able to prevent destruction. Biological annihilation and perhaps the end of human civilization as we know it, we're simply postponing it. Sometimes my students realize this, and I watch them crumple into climate nihilism. If we can't save the Earth, they ask, why bother? Should I just drive my gas guzzler and fly everywhere and just give up? In contrast with my students' nihilism, I have found that my response to our hurtling toward the brink is more one of personal grief. It's made all the more accurate by parenting and its attendant opportunities to see the world through the dual lenses of my eyes and my children's. Their wonder at the natural world is still untainted, but when I look, I see ghosts of what's already been lost. My children barely know the joys of hunting for fireflies on a summer night. There are so many fewer fireflies to find. Sometimes this fills me with a grief so profound, I cannot catch my breath. I'm teaching about Earth. I want to turn away from the hardest material. I construct my syllabus to end with a discussion of air pollution and the Clean Air Act to show students that we have wrestled with thorny problems and won in the past. But neither I nor my students are so naive to think that climate change and biological annihilation can be transformed in the way that acid rain and air pollution were radically transformed for the better by a single piece of legislation. Too much has been lost, and too many losses are already locked in. So should we all succumb to nihilism and rage and grief about our earth? Should we all just look away, go on with our small lives and ignore what is happening around us? For years I have wanted to look away. I have thought about no longer teaching about Earth's destruction because it's so painful. But every year I teach it again. I assign my students new reading, articles by scientists and academics, members of my methodical tribe, chronicling, quantifying, and categorizing the losses we are suffering. Their work is academic, but what they are witnessing is much greater than what they can count. To truly witness this moment on Earth, we can't just name the species lost. We must mourn them. In this work of grief and naming and acknowledgement, my training as a scientist doesn't help me. But my training in mindfulness does, because I learned how to breathe with loss. I can choose not to look away from the hard things, but to sit with them. Acknowledge and name that pain and trust myself to be able to move forward. This may be what I truly have to offer my students and my children. Many students come to my classroom already knowing about carbon dioxide and sea level rise and mass extinction. What they don't know, because none of us really do, is how to move forward, how to breathe, how to live with the knowledge of our own personal and planetary mortality. But perhaps I can offer tools to endure with some grace. To fully process what we are losing on Earth, I had to stop responding only as a scientist. My way forward comes instead from my experience of illness. My stem cell transplant wasn't pointless just because I will eventually die of something. The years I've gained, however, few as they may be, were precious and beyond measure. So too with the Earth. Each generation of humans living in relative abundance and each species saved from extinction for another 50 years and each wild place left to function and inspire in its wilderness is precious. Precious beyond measure. And as I have begun sitting mindfully with the sadness of Earth's destruction, I have started to incorporate it into myself. Mindfulness doesn't decrease my sense of loss, but it reminds me I can get through it year by year, hour by hour, breath by breath. It helps me acknowledge the pain and to start to name it, not just as a scientist, but as a human spirit. It helps me tell my students each autumn that the atmosphere contains more carbon dioxide than it did the autumn before, to write checks to environmental advocacy organizations, or to write my representatives to fight the willful blindness I see in our government. When I was ill, I was terrified, as you might expect for a 37-year-old mother of two kids that are under 6, and a disease with a 2-year survival rate of 25%. Initially, I read all the statistics on prognosis for my disease, my age, my gender. My anxiety began to ease when I fully acknowledged and named the nearness of death, no matter how I sliced the numbers, by being more present to my suffering on my worst days, by naming it, not just clinically, but as a full-hearted human desperate to stay alive. I found myself more present to my joy as well. By finally looking mortality in the face, its presence in my soul began to shrink, and I could enjoy the small joys that I could find. I taught my 2-year-old to taste honeysuckle. I showed my 6-year-old cicada shells. Inevitably, the climate will warm. whole ecosystems will be lost. And someday, there will be a last generations of humans on Earth. But the years that we can postpone each loss and each wild place and creature saved are inextricably valuable. And so I keep teaching and processing and working to stave off the inevitable. I don't know if any of these things will truly prevent catastrophic changes on Earth. I suspect not. But I give those gifts freely, hopefully, and in the knowledge that they are all I have to give. Nothing we can do will prevent the Earth from being deeply transformed. Maybe the next generation, my children or grandchildren, will be the last to live in large-scale human civilization. Or maybe the efforts of me, my students, and millions of others, like-minded people, will push back the inevitable collapse for another 100 years or 500 years, perhaps allowing us to coexist longer with the wonder of wild places and creatures. There is no preventing the inevitable, but the delay is precious and it's all we have. I didn't know if I could make it through without bawling on this one. It was so good and so moving, and I feel like a complete idiot, but God, I've gone through a whole lot, and this piece just spoke to me because you know what? I might not be a science teacher, and you're not science teachers, but the profound reality of that piece of writing is that we keep going on, and we keep doing these things that we do. We keep doing them so that we can make what we have better, a better place to live every single day, and not wallow in the misery of what life really is. And let me tell you, I can wallow. I wallow every day sometimes, but I got to get myself out of it. And so do you. We all do, because we have important work, no matter how shitty we feel or how lousy it is out there and how mad we get. We got to get up every day and we have to do something meaningful. Thanks for coming. I love you. Peace. Bye.